In 1989, when the entire North American bus industry began leaning toward low-floor designs to meet new standards, Orion chose another path. It launched an all-new high-floor model, the Orion V. It was a bold decision, going against the trend, but it also created one of the most durable machines of that era. Born at the intersection of two eras, the Orion V left a strong mark on the 1990s, growling with the familiar Detroit diesel sound, standing firm during rush hour, and then quietly leaving the stage when the rules of the game changed. This is not just the story of a bus, but the portrait of an entire era, where durability and accessibility fought to rewrite the future of public transit. By the late 1980s, the streets of North America were filled with aging fleets. Transit systems from New York to Chicago to Toronto were struggling with buses that had logged hundreds of thousands of miles and were long past their prime. The demand was clear. Cities needed a replacement, something reliable, tough enough for rush hour, and simple to maintain in the tight schedules of a big city garage. At the same time, change was coming. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 was just around the corner, and with it came a new standard of accessibility. Low-floor designs were beginning to appear, promising level boarding and easier access. But in that moment, the technology was still young, the costs were high, and the supply chains weren't ready. Transit managers weren't about to gamble their entire fleet on an unproven experiment. Orion saw the gap. Instead of leaping into the unknown, they doubled down on what they knew best: the high floor. In 1989, the Orion V rolled out as the final refinement of a proven formula: solid steel construction, conventional drivetrains, and a platform that maintenance crews already understood. The competition was fierce. GM's RTS had its futuristic curves, Gillig's Phantom offered simplicity, and New Flyer's D40 was gaining ground. But Orion wasn't chasing fashion. Their pitch was practical: durability, predictable life cycle costs, and the reassurance that any mechanic could keep it running. In that context, the Orion V wasn't just another bus. It was a deliberate answer to a very specific moment in history. If the Orion V had one mission, it was to take the traditional high-floor bus and polish it to its absolute best. From the outside, its lines were simple and square, functional rather than flashy. Underneath, though, was a structure designed for endurance. The frame was heavy-duty steel, built to handle the punishing cycles of urban service. Mechanics appreciated how panels could be removed quickly, how the engine bay and electrical cabinets were accessible without a wrestling match. Every detail was aimed at making the bus tough on the road, but manageable in the garage. The Orion V came in a range of sizes: the standard 35-foot version for tighter routes, the 40-foot model that became the workhorse, and even a 60-foot articulated giant for heavy commuter lines. Configurations varied, too: 2 wide doors for city service, or a single front door with higher back seats for suburban duty. This flexibility allowed transit agencies to fit the Orion V into nearly any role. Power came from familiar names. Detroit Diesel's 6V92TA two-stroke gave the early models their trademark growl, while the Series 54-stroke added cleaner operation in the 1990s. Cummins L10, ISM, and ISL engines offered torque and longevity, and some fleets even chose Caterpillar's 3116 or 3126. Coupled to Allison's B400 and B500 automatic transmissions, the drivetrain was as close to industry standard as it got: smooth, strong, and reliable. Still, accessibility was the Orion V's weakness. Boarding required climbing high steps, and wheelchair access depended on lifts that demanded strict maintenance. Kneeling suspension could help, but it was no substitute for the flat entry of a true low floor. What the Orion V offered in strength, durability, and common parts, it lacked in passenger flow and universal access, and that trade-off would define its legacy. For all its steel and horsepower, the Orion V's real success was measured in who bought it and why. In North America's toughest markets, it found a home. New York City Transit ordered them by the hundreds, sending them into the unforgiving streets of Manhattan and Brooklyn, where buses ran nose to tail, morning to midnight. Toronto's TTC trusted the Orion V to handle brutal Canadian winters, its square body plowing through snow and slush. In Washington, D.C., WMATA relied on them to move federal workers and commuters across the capital. Across the Northeast and Midwest, systems chose Orion V because they knew it could take a beating. The logic was simple: reliability in rush hour. Maintenance crews already had parts on the shelves, and every mechanic knew how to keep a Detroit diesel or a Cummins alive. Early low-floor models, with their new technology and fragile ramps, looked risky by comparison. Orion V offered stability, a safe bet at a time when transit agencies could not afford downtime. And it wasn't a one-size-fits-all machine. In crowded urban corridors, the two-door city configuration kept passenger flow steady, predictable, and surprisingly quick. Out on suburban commuter routes, single-door versions with high-back seats turned the Orion V into a long-haul workhorse, carrying riders smoothly over miles of highway. Over the years, its economics proved just as convincing. With solid frames and straightforward drivetrains, many Orion Vs outlasted their expected service life. Agencies kept them running well into the 2000s, stretching their investment until the low-floor revolution could no longer be ignored. Behind the wheel, the Orion V felt like a machine built with drivers in mind. The torque came on strong, delivering power right when you needed it to push through traffic or climb a steep grade. Allison's automatic transmission shifted with a smooth confidence, letting operators focus on the road instead of fighting the gears. With solid steering response and a turning radius that fit even in tight city blocks, the bus handled better than its boxy frame suggested. Drivers often said it felt planted, a bus that gave them control instead of demanding it. For passengers, the experience was just as memorable. Boarding meant climbing a few tall steps, but once inside, the cabin felt open, sturdy, and built to last. The seats were firm but dependable, and the ride was accompanied by a soundtrack every commuter came to know: the unmistakable roar of a Detroit diesel or the steady hum of a Cummins. For many, that sound was the heartbeat of rush hour, background noise that became part of everyday life in the city. In the garage, mechanics respected the Orion V. The engine bay opened wide, electrical lines and air hoses were laid out sensibly, and troubleshooting felt straightforward. The wheelchair lift, while useful, demanded discipline in maintenance, but overall the bus was a shop's friend rather than its enemy. And then there was the presence. Square, upright, and muscular, the Orion V didn't just arrive, it announced itself. For those who rode or worked around it, you could hear it before you saw it, and you never forgot what was coming. For all its strength, the Orion V was built for a world that was already slipping away. By the mid-1990s, the Americans with Disabilities Act was in full effect, and expectations for accessibility were no longer negotiable. Passengers wanted level boarding, quick ramps, and faster stops. The low-floor bus delivered all of that. It cut dwell times, smoothed passenger flow, and made every route easier for riders in wheelchairs, parents with strollers, or seniors with limited mobility. Against that kind of convenience, the old step-up design simply couldn't compete. Then came emissions. New EPA deadlines forced manufacturers to rethink engines, exhaust systems, and after-treatment technology. The low-floor platform offered more flexibility to package these new systems without sacrificing passenger space. High-floor designs, once praised for durability, now looked cramped and outdated when it came to meeting federal standards. Transit agencies noticed, and so did Washington. Federal funding began to favor accessibility. Requests for proposals increasingly specified low-floor buses as the baseline, leaving the high-floor Orion V without the political or economic advantage it once held. Orion adapted as best it could, shifting its focus to the low-floor Orion VI and, later, the more successful Orion VII. By 2009, the Orion V quietly ended production. With it went one of the last large-scale high-floor orders in North America, closing the chapter on a design philosophy that had dominated city streets for generations. The era of the Orion V was over, not because it failed, but because the rules of the game had changed. Even after production ended, the Orion V never faded quietly from memory. It stood as one of the last great high-floor buses, a milestone marking the end of an era. For decades, transit design had been built around durability, steel frames, and mechanical strength. The Orion V carried that philosophy to its peak, just as the industry pivoted toward a new age of accessibility and rider-focused service. In that sense, it became a bridge between two worlds, the muscular toughness of the past and the human-centered design of the future. Among transit fans and preservationists, its legacy is alive and well. Dozens of Orion Vs have been saved, restored, and proudly displayed at museums or enthusiast gatherings. Photos of their squared-off profiles fill archives, and scale models sit on collectors' shelves. On YouTube, recordings of their engine roars, whether the deep growl of a Detroit diesel or the steady thrum of a Cummins, still draw thousands of nostalgic views. For those who lived with it, the Orion V left an imprint on the senses. Its sharp-edged body, wide windows, and unmistakable sound made it easy to recognize long before it came into sight. It wasn't just another bus. It was an experience, etched into the rhythm of daily life. And perhaps that is the lasting lesson. A machine can be well built, even beloved, and still lose to the march of time. In the end, it is not always strength that wins, but adaptability. The Orion V was not a perfect bus, nor was it a trendsetter, but its durability, its familiar roar, and its squared-off silhouette turned it into a witness of a turbulent era. It became the bridge between the high-floor past and the low-floor future, a machine that lived true to the spirit of its time and then quietly stepped aside when the rules changed. And what about you? Do you have memories of the Orion V, school rides, daily commutes, or simply the sound of a Detroit diesel echoing from down the street? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to hit like to support the channel. And remember to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey through the machines that made history.